Hi there. Welcome to another first look. This time, just to keep you guessing, I'm indoors. It's cold outside, and that's just what we're doing today. So I think we're past Contact Watch 2023. This is just what I'm doing now. So we're over that part. But thanks for being here as we move forward in ordinary time and we figure out what on earth we're doing. The benefit to it being indoors is twofold. One, I can have coffee while I'm sitting here talking to you, which I can't really successfully do when I'm outside walking. And two, no one here has to worry if I'm going to fall down into the mud, as you are all, I'm sure, very worried about last week. At least one of you was. So anyway, this is the safe edition of First Look. So we've been doing this series called The Origin Story, looking at the beginning of of Jesus' story and kind of thinking about what that means for his ministry. And we've been looking at that through stories of his adult ministry. The Beatitudes was last week, and we've done other stories, calling of the disciples, etc. This week is a little bit different. Still focused on Jesus, still the same series, but from a very different angle. This from the angle of Paul. So this week we're looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And it's one of those passages that, well, let me back up a little bit. It's one of those passages that I think is giving definition to who Jesus is for the follower, right? Not in his own words, but from someone else's perspective. And of course, this is Paul giving this to the church in Corinth, a very different context than the one that we see Jesus in. Now, here's the question. I don't think Paul probably knows the Jesus origin story. Now, is it possible? Maybe. Is it one of those things that maybe wasn't written down until later? Maybe. Because if I'm remembering right, and again, this is a first look, so I haven't done a whole bunch of research. 1 Corinthians is an authentic Pauline book, meaning experts, people who know more than me, would tell you authentically that Paul himself wrote it. Because there are books like the Timothy books that we assume that someone was penning in Paul's name. This is pretty authentically Paul. Now, the reason that's important is because it times the book a little bit. So most of Paul's writings were like in between 50, let's say 55 and 65, somewhere in there, 52 and 60 something in that time frame. So the Gospel of Mark was probably written around that time, give or take, somewhere in there. But the Luke and Matthew Gospel, you would imagine, came later. So if nothing else, he probably didn't have the Gospels as a source. He may have had the oral tradition as a source, and maybe some of Jesus' origin story was out there, or he knew, or Peter knew, or, certainly, you can imagine a conversation between him and James. Now, him and James weren't always, on the same page, but maybe it came up. Anyway, so we're not looking at this through the eyes of Paul, who knew the story necessarily. We're looking at it as this is a story, this is a way that, in a perspective that Paul is giving to the people in Corinth, and we are as sort of narrators. You know how the narrators have that sort of eagle eye. They know more than the people in the story. That's kind of our role here. We know more, probably, than Paul does about the beginnings of Jesus' story. Um, but we'll see. I could be wrong. I'll do a little investigating and see if I come up with anything that would contradict that. So we're going to get into the story itself, and we'll get into how it plays into the origin story. But let me remind you what's happening in the books of Corinth. There's two, obviously. So let's first remember that Paul writes from a very particular perspective in general, right? He's someone who has a very educated background. He has all the chops. He has all the pedigree. He's a Roman citizen. He's got everything you could possibly want. He's using his power and influence to try to subdue and eliminate this upstart cult of Christians, and then is converted. So the idea of being included is very important. Almost too important. If you think about, Paul is often saying, like, I'm a disciple, like he's always kind of raising his hand and making sure that we remember that he was chosen. You know, he's still among the apostles. He's still, you know, even if he wasn't the original 12, he's still someone we should consider with authority. And he's certainly doing that with people who are outside of the fold, outside of Israel. So legitimacy is a big deal for him, right? Authority and legitimacy. Feeling included, feeling like, and also, if you think about it, that's a big part of what he's doing for the Gentiles. He is bringing into the fold those who would otherwise not be. And that's obviously a huge part of his deal. So that's what we remember about Paul first. Second, it's important to remember that Paul always writes differently depending on the situation. Imagine for a moment that Brian Wallace was writing Highland and Wexford and Northmont a letter and giving us all some encouragement and maybe some pointers, maybe some like, hey, maybe, some direction, we'll say. And some of that was based on his experience, and some of it was just based on what he'd heard or what he'd been told, or what maybe even what someone like me would have asked him. The three letters are going to be different, right? They're all going to be by him. They're all going to have that kind of Brian Wallace hue, but the subject matter and the tone is going to be different. And that's really important because we read these different things. It's the reason why in the Gospels we pay attention to the audience, and in the same way we pay attention to the audience, and we pay attention not only to who and where they are, but also what were the issues, what was going on. And I think 1 Corinthians is, I have letters that I really connect to. So Romans is a really important letter because it really is it lays out a lot of the theology that is important to us, especially as Presbyterians. Reformed thought comes a lot from a book like Romans because it spells out, it's like sort of the book of theology. It's like laying that out for you. And I like the book of Hebrews just personally for the message of perseverance and the person of Jesus. But 1 Corinthians, I think, is one of the most usable books for pastors. It's the most pastorally focused letter for how to conduct the church. Timothy and other books kind of get into what leaders should be like and that kind of thing. But I think in terms of how we conduct church and why we do what we do, I think it's a really I think it's a really useful book. So it's really drawn my attention over the last several years. So that's where we are. We're in this book that, like, if you want an anchor point, if you need, like, First Corinthians, what's that one about? I would say that probably one of the more memorable parts of the book is that this is where we find the words of institution. And I think it helps define a lot of the book, because it's saying, look, you're worshiping in this very diverse kind of setting, and we need language that is common. And that's why the words of institution and the communion, the way we celebrate it, is done the way it is, because it's this bringing together. It's this evening of the playing field. It's a moment of justice. And I think you see that woven in and out of this book. And so that's something to keep in mind. And then we're also going to look at this passage through the lens of, again, this origin story, right? Okay. So we're 11 and a half minutes in. Let's give this a look. So, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Here we go. When I came to you, brothers and sisters, I did not come proclaiming the mystery of God to you in lofty words of wisdom. For I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. And I came to you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. My speech and my proclamation were not with plausible words of wisdom, but with demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith might rest not on human wisdom, but on the power of God. You'll probably hear this in the sermon, because it fits so neatly into a sermon, is my guess. How would I sum that up? Paul is saying, I am not coming to you with a preconceived notion of what you should do. When I came to you, I tried to see you the way you presented yourself to me, so that I didn't come in with my own, agenda. But I hopefully came in with God's agenda, seeing you, experiencing you through that lens, and only offering what I knew, which is a pretty important element, of course, to faith. And I'm looking forward to exploring a little bit more now that I'm sort of churning through this. How did we see Jesus do the same, or did we? And how is Paul following in the example of Jesus as he does that? Or is he not? I don't know. I got to think about that for a minute. But that jumped out to me when I read it, and I was like, oh, I should say that. So that's the first thing. So Paul's not coming into this with a preconceived notion. He allowed the situation to dictate what he thought, which is a really awesome way of doing a lot of things. Ministry is kind of like that, for sure, for me at least. It doesn't matter how many years I do this, and like I'm coming up on 12 in ordained ministry. I've been doing ministry in general for 20-ish. But, when you enter a new call, like I did with Northmont a few years ago, you try to go into it with as blank slate as you can. Like, you go into it with your bag of resources and tools, but you try to make sure that you go into it allowing them to kind of tell you what it is that they need. Not like, well, I read everything and I know what you need and here it is. You have to let the people in front of you tell you what they need. This is going to sound like an odd jump, but it's the same thing in funerals. When I meet a family for a funeral, whether I knew them before or not, you always wait to figure out what it is they need. Say, hey, listen, we can do whatever it is, but you have to tell me first where you are. try not to prescribe them. I have resources. I got things that I can use, no problem. But you tell me what you need. Do you need me to be up front and be a lot and be, kind of the one who's doing the majority of the speaking, or do I need to just do this and just facilitate? That's what I hear from Paul, and that's what I think is an important lesson for all of us as we're entering into leadership. And I think the same is true too, as we're entering into this new season of some people rotating off sessions, people coming on. Some of them have been there before, some of them have not, or some of them haven't been there in a few years. Go into it with some fresh eyes, at least whenever you can. So that's the first section. All right. Verse 6. Yet among the mature we do speak wisdom, though it is not a wisdom of this age or of the rules of this age, who are doomed to perish. But we speak God's wisdom, secret and hidden, which I think is the title of the sermon, Secret and Hidden, which God decreed before the ages for our glory. None of the rulers of this age understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, what no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the human heart conceived, what God has prepared for those who love him. These things God has revealed to us through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. For what human being knows what is truly human except the human spirit that is within? So also no one comprehends what is truly God's except the Spirit of God. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit that is from God, so that we may understand the gifts bestowed on us by God. That gets deep really quick. I mean, that's a lot. I encourage you, I'm not going to do it for you, just for time's sake, but that's a lot. I like talking about wisdom for a lot of different reasons. I like, the first one is that the first reason is that I think it's always good for us to make a distinction between intelligence and wisdom, and because it's sort of like the difference between, we were just talking about this with Liam today, kindness. What does it mean to be kind, and what does it mean to be nice? Lots of people that are nice. Hey, how's it going? But we don't know as many people who are truly kind. And I'm using those words very intentionally. Kindness is a giving of oneself, a genuine kind of love and devotion to the other. Niceness is the cousin of politeness. It's just the facade that you put on that makes people feel comfortable maybe, but doesn't really go any further than that. It's a good thing to be nice, but it's not the same as being kind. Intelligence and wisdom is kind of the same. Intelligence is a wonderful thing, and we should always be trying to cultivate it. One of the things that we tell Liam every day when he goes to school is that you have two jobs today. Empathy, and we follow that up with what empathy means, just as a reminder, kindness, thinking about other people, and learning. And if you do those two things today, then that's success. And, the getting at wisdom is kind of like getting at, how we move from intelligence, what we learn, what we take in, our ability to absorb it, and then our ability to apply it. And wisdom is basically that. It's intelligence put to godly use. taking what we have and then moving it out into the world and deciphering the world compassionately. And, you know, we could spend and should spend a lot of time thinking about the nature of what it means to be wise. But I think the part that I am probably more inclined to focus on is that secret and hidden part, because that's the part I think that's really intriguing. And again, this is my first thought. I haven't looked at this extensively, but I think one of the things that I first pops into my mind about the secret and hidden part, is that we spend so much time trying to understand the world around us. You know, just like I said, the learning part. We spend a lot of time learning. Some of it from an early age is that we learn how to get what we want by crying or, you know, whatever it is that we do. Persistence. We learn to get what we want. We learn to protect ourselves. We learn to trust, you know, the people who are raising us. And then we learn quickly whether those lessons we need to double down on those lessons, or we need to move forward from them. Are the people who are raising us worthy of the trust that we have bestowed upon them, or are they not? Is what I'm doing to keep myself safe working? Is the way I get what I want working or not? And we start to learn to read the room, right? Read around us, you know, that emotional intelligence, you know, and we spend so much of our time trying to figure out the way the world works. And some of what I think Paul is talking about is the stuff that isn't obvious to us. And I think that there's a good reason why it's not obvious to us. Most of what we learn is about putting ourselves at some advantage, an economic advantage, a safety advantage, a power advantage. It gives us something that gives us the most praise. You know, you latch onto the things you're good at. You latch onto the things that people give you praise for. You latch onto the things that make you money. You know, the things that come easy to you. You know, there's a reason why some people go into engineering, or they go into medicine, or they go into whatever, because it comes easy to them, right? Engineers don't become poets, and that's true for a reason, and the reverse is also true. And so I think that's the way that conventional wisdom works, is that we do what puts us at some sort of advantage, emotionally, economically, or maybe just safety and security wise. But I think godly wisdom works, I think, in a very counterintuitive way. And I think that that's the part of it that's really hard. And it's not just hard when you're a kid, it's really, really hard when you're an adult as well. Because you're doing things with, sometimes you're fighting against the conventional wisdom. I don't like to call it earthly wisdom, because it seems like there's, I don't like separate, like God isn't involved in it. I think God's involved with it. I think God gives us those gifts to use, you know, whether it's for your profession, vocation, whether it's for the way you live your life or whatever. But I think what I mean is that not everything is going to give us some sort of advantage. And that's some of what you see in Corinth, is that you had the haves and the have-nots, right? It would make sense to separate ourselves this way, because that's the way the world works. And when he goes on to talk about communion, we realize that might make sense because of the way the economic structure and the tier structure works in the context that you live in, but it doesn't really make any sense when it comes to God. So he's sort of setting that idea. And of course, then you start to look at, that godly wisdom part, that unconventional piece, and you can start to then see Paul in it, and you can start to see the origin story in it. And when you start to see Paul in it, is Paul's need to, one, do what was not conventional, dropping his position in Israel and doing what he was doing was in no way, shape, or form conventional. That didn't make any sense. Wouldn't have made any. He's abandoning every sort of safety net, every kind of position of authority that he had to go and do this other thing, and that would have been insane. At least it would for many of us. And then you also start to again see that origin story of Jesus creep in, because we see that Jesus didn't have anything conventional about his beginning, neither did his parents, and he was introducing the kingdom of God into a world that in many ways was not ready for it. And that's what you see there. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to kind of leave it there, but that's where I'm headed in my mind. What does God wisdom mean? Who do we see Paul as? Who do we see Jesus as? And how do those three connect? Sorry. So that's what I have for you. That's what I'm thinking about. First look. All right. Thank you for joining me in just this room. Thanks for having coffee with me. Thanks for being who you are. Thanks for thinking through this with me. It's a different way of thinking, and I appreciate your willingness to kind of try it out with me. And I'll see you next time for another First Look. Take care.